the opportunity to travel to Israel and go to Bethlehem, which is pretty cool. And we had the chance to stand, or rather kneel, in the spot where Jesus was born. It was a pretty special experience, but not at all how I imagined it to be. So I've got a map up here of Israel, so that you can I always like to know where places are, so you can kind of see where Jerusalem is, and then you can see where Bethlehem is too. And so we had to, as you can see, we had to travel into Palestine, and we had to go into the West Bank, which was a bit of an experience in itself. But it was really exciting, and I can remember on the morning, because this was like a bit of a lifelong dream for me to be able to go to Israel and, see all these places. And I remember on the morning that we were going to go to Bethlehem saying to Robert, now you need to be ready, because I'm probably going to get a little bit emotional. So just prepare yourself for what that might look like, because this is going to be just like this amazing, beautiful, spiritual experience. But what we encountered was quite different to what I had imagined, because I had imagined this beautiful, scenic thing, I guess, in my mind. There might have been a few sheep in the paddock. The cattle were lowing, whatever that means, somewhere on these green grassy hills. But instead of beautiful green pastures, they were brown, they were dirty. The streets were lined with dusty old buildings. There was rubbish everywhere. I don't know if we're just used to clean green New Zealand, but it was pretty dirty. There were people everywhere trying to sell you things, bags, t-shirts, hats, coffee, little ornaments and trinkets and stuff. And then right in the middle of this was this big church, the Church of the Nativity in Manger Square in Bethlehem. And it seems like in Israel, just about every historic site or every biblical site has a big church built over the top of it. So I've got a short video here of us arriving at the Church of Nativity. So that's Robert's wonderful video work there. So as you have seen, we entered through this tiny little wee doorway. We went into this quite expansive and elaborate and ornate building. It was beautiful on the inside, so it's really quite, dirty and yucky outside, but inside the building is beautiful. And there's three churches inside this one church. There's a Catholic church, there's an Armenian church, and then there's a Greek Orthodox chapel. All the different chapels inside this one church. So I don't know if you noticed the big golden altar down the end. That was the Greek Orthodox one. And all of this is over the top of the stable where Jesus was born. And even in the Catholic Church, they've got this big, huge altar, and inside it is this little tiny bit of wood that they say is a fragment from the manger that Jesus was born into. So, who knows? But anyway, so there's this big, huge church. And then this picture is what we arrived to, which was a queue that was 2 hours long. And then as you make your way down that, there's a little door at the end that you go through, but that goes through to another queue that goes further back. So it was quite a long queue. And the closer you got to the birth site of Jesus, the more kind of squashed in you became, and the more pushy things became, people jostling to try and keep their space in the line and get to the front. So I think I've got another picture here of us going down. So you come to the end of the line and then you go down these steps into another little doorway. So this is us all kind of squeezing in together to go down into the next doorway. And then if we go to the next photo, here it is, the moment. This is said to be the spot where Jesus was born. So the very spot. And we were able to stop there for around 2 seconds, the time it took to take this photo, and then we were moved along for the very next people to come in and have their photo taken. So this beautiful, spiritual, emotional experience that I was looking forward to was instead kind of quite manic, quite chaotic, and very rushed. And yeah, I guess not the deeply spiritual encounter that I had dreamed up in my mind. It was one of those times in your life where you have these huge expectations of what's going to happen, and then it doesn't quite pan out that way. And it wasn't until the end of the day when we got back to our hotel, and the tour was finished, and we had a chance to stop and actually reflect on what we'd actually done, that I guess I actually spent time thinking about that first Christmas and allowed the wonder of God sending his son into this world to kind of wash over me, and the significance of being in that space, that it really hit home. I don't know about you, but I love Christmas. It's always been a special time of year for me. The gifts, the food, the music, the decorations, the holidays, the sunshine sometimes, maybe not today, and getting to spend time with family, which can also be quite stressful as well, I might add. But I know that there will be some things that will happen during this time. I know that we will gather as a family and sit round the table and enjoy a meal together, Christmas lunch or dinner, and we will share some really bad Christmas cracker jokes that we do every year, the same ones, and it's sort of like you forget them, but then you do them again. I know that in my family there will be puzzle time, so we all do a jigsaw puzzle together. Often into the early hours of the morning, we sit around and eat Christmas cake and shortbread and just puzzle time, we call it. I know that there will be beach time, hopefully. There'll be some sunshine, and we will get to go to the beach, and there'll be some lying in the sun, there'll be swimming, there'll be playing games on the beach together, frisbee or football. There'll be time reading a book and napping, which I love to do. And it's because of all these things that I look forward to Christmas. But the lead up to Christmas can be quite busy as well, can't it? There's breakups, there's parties, there's buying gifts, there's organising food, there's sending cards, there's packing for holidays, cleaning the house for people coming to stay, kids finishing school, prize giving, and for us this year there's packing in the mix as well. So time to get it all done can be quite stressful, and it can turn from the most wonderful time of the year into the most stressful time of the year. And I know for some that Christmas itself is just a difficult time, and for some people they just want to get through it and out the other side. So in the preparation, in the pressures, and in the parties, where does Jesus fit in? How do we make room for Jesus during all of this? Do we have to wait till it's all over and done with before we actually have time to reflect and stop and realise the significance of the season, which is Jesus, the reason for the season? So this morning we want to take some time to look at Joseph and his first Christmas experience. So Joseph's first Christmas experience was the first Christmas experience, and I don't think it panned out for him quite how he had expected it might. Joseph was engaged and hopefully quite excited about getting married, about building a home and a family together with Mary. Exciting days ahead. But then he finds out that Mary is pregnant and he's not the father. So news of an unplanned pregnancy is always quite big. and is often a shock. Sometimes it's good news, sometimes not so good news. But for Joseph, it wasn't just a shock, it was also unbelievable. It was also embarrassing. And of course, his natural reaction is, okay, I'm out. This is me. That's my limit. I'm gone. And it says in verse 19, because Joseph, her husband, was faithful to the law and yet did not want to expose her to public disgrace, he had in mind to divorce her quietly. So we know already that Joseph is a pretty good guy, don't we? And a graceful man who made a very graceful decision. He knew what needed to be done. He made the decision. He had in mind what he was going to do, and he was going to divorce Mary quietly. But I love what happened next in the story. And it says that in verse 20, but after he had considered this. So it's the fact that Joseph stopped and he considered. So what does it mean to consider? It means to think carefully, to contemplate, to reflect. So Joseph stopped. He reflected on his decision, on what he had just found out, on what he was about to do. And it was after he stopped and spent time thinking things over that it opened up the space for God to move and allowed space for God to speak. Verse 20, but after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. So nothing had changed in the circumstances. Mary was still pregnant. Joseph was still not the father. But Joseph had allowed space for God to speak, and that would change the whole outcome of what was to happen. The consequence of stopping and allowing space for God to speak meant he could hear God's plan and God's purpose. And in verse 21 it says, she will give birth to a son. You are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. So that was God's plan and that was God's purpose, that Jesus would come and save us from our sins. We live in a country which is on a journey towards understanding mental well-being, and part of which is the importance of taking time to stop and consider. They say that reflection is said to be an important practice to improving not only our mental health, but our overall health. It helps us to understand ourselves better, and as a result, helps us to better understand others. It helps us to pause, to create space. And this is what Joseph did. He paused and he created space, and it was in this space that God spoke and revealed his plan and purpose. So this Christmas, in the busyness of planning and preparation, and the busyness of holidays and the busyness of celebrations, is there space to stop and consider and allow time and space for God to speak? For me, this is my 51st Christmas. That's a bit scary, saying that out loud. So I've heard the Christmas story quite a few times over my years. There may be some in the room that have heard it not as many times as me, maybe up in that corner. There may be some that have heard it a few more times than me. But each year, when Christmas rolls around, it's another opportunity for us to stop and consider what it means that Jesus came into this world. To stop and consider the wonderful message of hope and forgiveness and the message of God with us. Sometimes I think we can get caught up in the motion and busyness of Christmas that there is no room for Jesus. It's not intentional, it just happens. Which can seem crazy, can't it? That we're so busy celebrating Christmas that we don't have time to stop and consider what it means for us. because time is a precious commodity, isn't it, for all of us? We are all given the same 24 hours in a day, and we will take or make time for those things that are important to us. Going to the gym, watching sports, lunch with friends, the list is endless. We make time when it matters. Can we make room for Jesus this Christmas? Will we take time to stop, to consider, to create space, to allow space for God to speak to us? Are we even expecting to hear from God this Christmas? When we hear the Christmas story again, maybe for the 51st, is that a number? 51st time for me, can we make room for the Christmas story to bring fresh awareness of the awe and wonder of the birth of Jesus? Today we've heard about Joseph and his first Christmas and how that changed his life forever. It started with shock, maybe even horror, but how Joseph made the choice to take the time to consider and create space for God, which didn't change the situation, but changed his perspective and changed his direction of what to do next. For some of us, Christmas is an exciting time of year, and we have a plan of what we think will happen. But sometimes things don't quite go according to plan, and sometimes Christmas or life can just throw a few curveballs. So we do actually have to stop and consider and allow space for God to move. And I'm speaking to myself today as I share this. You know, you have a plan of what you think Christmas is going to look like, but then something happens and it's like, oh, that wasn't part of the plan. What do I do? Will we make room for Jesus this Christmas? Now, there are lots of people in the Christmas story. There's not just Joseph. There's Mary, Jesus, the angels, the wise men, the shepherds, Herod. All have a different part to play in the story, but all had to take time to allow God to speak to them or through them. Joseph was to consider, Mary maybe to surrender, Jesus to save, the wise men to give, the angels to announce, the shepherds to worship, and even Herod had a part to play, to challenge. Could God want to speak to us about any of these things this Christmas? It might not happen like it did for Joseph with an angel of the Lord appearing in our dreams, though it might, who knows? Because it's the same God today, yesterday, and forever, and he can still speak that way. But it may be a thought or that inner voice, or God can speak to us through his word, from a wise, trusted friend, through a song, through nature even. There are lots of ways that God can speak to us if we make room to listen.